Hello and welcome to Norwood Wesleyan Church online. This is Pastor Phillip Telfer and I'm glad you could join us. Our church in Edmonton, Alberta is dedicated to reaching for God together. We welcome you along on the journey and we hope our time together encourages you toward a more meaningful and personal relationship with God. If you think I'm standing up before offering, you're right. We've moved offering to the end of our service, and so we'll close with the final song, and that same song will be our offering song. So this is our new program, I guess, our new order of service. And if you haven't been with us before, if you have, you're maybe becoming sick of hearing what we're about. But this is what we're about. We're about meeting needs with love and compassion. If it's your first week with us, we want you to know that from the beginning of your experience or your time with us, because that's our goal. Our goal is to accomplish this objective. And in order for us to accomplish this objective of meeting needs with love and compassion, three things have to happen. Firstly, we must see needs where they exist. Secondly, we must sense needs where they exist. And finally, we must serve needs where they exist. We must see, sense, and serve needs where they exist. When it comes to needs are often highlighted by pain. Maybe you've recognized that already in your life, hopefully within at least your body. A healthy human body has pain receptors that are designed to communicate its needs by shooting signals through the nervous system to kind of cue helpful responses from other parts of the body. So pain is a way of highlighting, or needs can be highlighted by pain. Another way of saying this is that our pain points to our needs. Our pain points to our needs. In order for us as a church to meet needs with love and compassion, that's our goal, we need to know what people need. And if we don't know what people need, we should take one step backwards and look for pain that is present in that person's life. And when we find that pain, we can start to follow that pain until we arrive at an understanding of what that person's needs are. And where we can finally begin to think about planning to respond to those needs in a helpful way. We're about meeting needs with love and compassion. In order to do that, we need to know what the needs are. And one way we can find them is by following people's pain, because our pain points to our needs. And when it comes to pain is something that we all feel from time to time. We're all aware of pain to some degree. Each of us knows what it means to be in pain, and sometimes we inflict pain upon ourselves. We're at fault, right? We make a mistake, we slip with a knife, and we inflict pain upon ourselves. Other times, pain is inflicted upon us by others, and sometimes it's an accident, and sometimes it's just a straight-out, flat-out abuse. We know what it is to be in pain. Other times, certain situations, like a car accident, can cause us to encounter incredible pain. Just the situation. Personal pain is not comparable, it is relative. And what I mean by that is it's not something that should be compared, it's something that should be identified with when it comes to pain. Our deepest connection with and knowledge of pain is relative to our personal experience. Some of us know what it means to lose someone that we love, and we know how much pain can come with that. And depending on the individual, maybe we've been exposed to different amounts of pain. Maybe some of us have lost a grandparent or a parent. Maybe some of us have lost a sibling, a friend, maybe a spouse or a child. In psychology class, they told me that the most intense form of pain is losing a child, but I would say that the most intense form of pain is relative to a person's experience. For some of us, we've never experienced losing someone that close that we love. We haven't lost those same people, so we don't know what kind of pain will come if and when that happens, but we have been hurt in different ways. Each of us has had an experience that has resulted in our most painful memory, and that might be different for different people because we have different experiences. And most likely, it's unique to each experience, each person. So pain isn't something that we should compare with our own experiences, because when we start to do that, saying like, I lost a child, I know what the most intense form of pain is, and this person over here who just lost their dog, that has nothing, like it doesn't even compare, right? When we start to compare pain, the danger is to minimize a person's experience with pain, which could be very likely that individual's most intense experience or encounter with pain. So pain isn't something that we should strive to compare with our own experiences. Pain is something we should seek to understand in the context of a person's individual experience, recognizing the pain for how it is being perceived instead of how we might think it should be perceived or how we would perceive it based off of our own unique personal experience with pain. So that's what I mean when I say that pain is not to be compared, but it's relative. It's not comparable, it's relative. The New Testament Gospel of Luke records a story of a person who experienced tremendous pain that was inflicted upon him by others. The story of the Good Samaritan is a popular passage from Jesus' teachings that illustrates the importance of meeting needs with love and compassion, which is what we're all about. And that's why we're going to spend some time reading it today. So if you have your Bibles with you, please turn to this passage in the New Testament, Luke chapter 10. Starting in verse 25, we're going to read through to verse 37. I opened the service with this passage, but I didn't continue until by the time we got to the parable. I didn't continue into the parable of the Good Samaritan. So we're going to read the whole thing at this time. Luke chapter 10, verse 25, and we'll end in verse 37. This is what it says. It says, on one occasion, an expert in the law stood up to test Jesus. Teacher, he asked, what must I do to inherit eternal life? Well, what is written in the law? Jesus replied, how do you read it? He answered Jesus, love the Lord your God with all your heart and with all your soul and with all your strength and with all your mind, and love your neighbor as yourself. You have answered correctly, Jesus replied. Do this and you will live. Verse 29. But he wanted to justify himself, so he asked Jesus, and who is my neighbor? In reply, Jesus said this, and this is the story. A man was going down from Jerusalem to Jericho when he fell into the hands of robbers. They stripped him of his clothes, beat him, and went away, leaving him half dead. A priest happened to be going down the same road, and when he saw the man, he passed by on the other side. So too a Levite, when he came to the place and saw him, passed by on the other side. But a Samaritan, as he traveled, came where the man was, and when he saw him, he took pity on him. He went to him and bandaged his wounds, pouring on oil and wine. Then he put the man on his own donkey, took him to an inn, and took care of him. The next day he took out 2 silver coins and gave them to the innkeeper. Look after him, he said, and when I return, I will reimburse you for any extra expense you may have. Which of these 3 do you think was a neighbor to the man who fell into the hands of robbers? The expert in the law replied, the one who had mercy on him. And Jesus told him, go and do likewise. Our goal as a church is to do just that, to go and do likewise, to meet needs with love and with compassion. And in order for us to accomplish this objective, as I began, we must see needs where they exist, we must sense needs where they exist, and finally we must serve needs where they exist. And with the story of the Good Samaritan in the back of our minds, I'm going to share 3 personal stories with us today, or with you today, to help us learn how to help people in need. And the first one has to do with the first stage of meeting needs with love and compassion, which is seeing the need. Seeing the need. I grew up in Africa, spent some time growing up in Africa anyway. And in that time, in those years that I was in Africa, there were developmental years and a lot of stuff happened. But in the midst of all the experiences that I had close-up encounters with pain and with poverty. And that's one of the things that it was a thicker thread of the narrative for me, from my personal experience in Africa. I had close-up encounters with pain and with poverty. And part of this played into the Sunday routine that we had. My dad was a pastor, and my mom was a nurse. And each Sunday morning, we had the routine of gathering me, my older sister, and my younger brother into our Nissan 4x4 truck with a camper shell on the back. And we would start in the front, and we would go out and move from our safe home and then away from the comforts of what would be the capital city of Maputo, Mozambique. And we would journey out of the city, picking people up along the way, and we would go until we ended up in villages. And that's where we had churches, and my dad would preach. And along the way, we would have different pickup zones where we would pick people up for church. And And as the mamas and the babies would fill up the cab, my brother and I would be defaulted to the back of the truck inside the camper shell. And so that's kind of the routine. And as it filled up, as we picked up more people, it wasn't uncommon for us to have 20 or more people with us by the time we reached the church in the village, and even more on the way out because people wanted to go to the city after service. I think our record was over 30, well over 30, like 38 people crammed inside, mamas and babies, and people laying all over the place in the back. Some people just, and it was full, pretty full. Anyway, as we would move out into the villages on a Sunday morning, I would not like Sunday mornings for this reason, because as we moved to these villages, I would become more and more uncomfortable for different reasons. There would be levels of discomfort that were rising as we would get closer to these churches, partly because I had to sit in the back where we didn't really have nice seats. We had little benches back there because it was a routine, and we learned to build some benches and put those back there in the back of the truck. But it was uncomfortable because it was hot. It was in Africa. It was uncomfortable because it was sweaty. We were squished together, many people back there. It was also uncomfortable because of the contrast of the clothes that I had on and the clothes that the person next to me had on, or the quality of the clothes that we had on, and the poverty that they were living in and the abundance that I was living in. And that contrast was super uncomfortable for me. And every week we would have this in-your-face poverty and pain squished and crammed together in this camper shell, me and my brother, and it was uncomfortable. I didn't like it. Those long Sunday drives in the back of our truck taught me that pain oozes. Pain oozes. Although we had a car and nice clothes and a safe home to return to after church in the village, I couldn't help but be affected by the reality that the people squeezing in around me may not have had any of those things. And that thought alone was painful. Just the thought was painful, let alone the experience they must have had. It was uncomfortable. It was something I didn't want to think about, and because it became so uncomfortable that it was something that I learned to ignore. I learned to ignore it. In the camper shell, we had 2 sliding windows on either side of the back, and my brother and I learned very quickly to start at the window, and we would take the windows for ourselves. It was a selfish move, but one of the things that I did was I sat by the window of the camper shell, selfishly wanting the breeze and the fresh air because it's hot and sticky and sweaty. But it also offered me a bit of separation from the discomfort of seeing the poor condition of the people that were in the truck with me. I literally turned my back on people in need. And just the thought of the pain they must have been feeling from living in poverty felt too heavy for me to carry. Like the priest in Luke chapter 10, the story of the Good Samaritan. He saw this guy half dead laying on the road who just got beaten, robbed, and he goes off to the other side. That was me. I saw people's pain and I chose to ignore it because it felt too heavy to carry. There's a word we use to describe moments where pain oozes. And when the pain of others moves us to feel pain ourselves, we call that compassion. Compassion. We can be emotionally moved by another person's experience with pain without having experienced their pain personally. Pain oozes. For this reason, when seeing needs becomes sensing needs or taking it on or feeling it yourself, the easiest response is to look away. Why? Because it's uncomfortable. So when we see needs and we begin to sense needs, stage 2 of helping people, it's uncomfortable because we start to feel what other people feel, this sensing the need. And so the easiest thing to do is shut it off, turn around, look away, find the window, escape, ignore that need. But there's a second stage, and that is staying there, sensing the need. For me, fast forward like 10 years, I'm in Mozambique again, the same country, but this time I'm coming by my own choice, and it's a year where I am seeking to serve people. And I'm in a room, very dark room on a very hot day, and I was sweating very much, and it was uncomfortable. And this guy, he was a pastor, he was on his bed, and he hadn't moved from his bed in a long time, and he had cancer. And I was there to help dress the wound. And so the bandages were being removed, and there was like a football-sized gash of just his insides showing. And it was very troubling for me to see that. It was very uncomfortable. Like the smells that were involved because he'd been there for a while. And the job before us was to clean the wound, to dress this wound, and to help this man deal with the incredible pain that was obvious by how he was responding to us taking the honey off of this wound. And he was just kind of, wincing and groaning, and it was very uncomfortable. But I stayed there in the room, sensing the need. The second stage, for as uncomfortable as it was, I stayed there. So sensing the need for me that day was staying in the room with that pastor with cancer, for as uncomfortable as it made me feel. And so I think at this point it's important for me to thank God for social workers. It's important for me to thank God for pastors, for people who will walk alongside us when we feel pain, incredible degrees. People who have dedicated their lives to staying in the room, to sticking with us through difficult conversations, to walking with us through the valleys, because they care for us. So thank you, everybody who does that. I know that there are quite a few in this room that have dedicated themselves to helping others. Thank you, guys. It means a lot. And there are not many people that are willing to stay in the room because it's uncomfortable. To identify with needs is one thing. To feel what others feel is another. To empathize with them based off our personal experiences is awesome, that we have that personal experience to draw from and to say, hey, me too, I know what this feels like, and so I can connect with you. I can encourage you and support you in ways that I wouldn't be able to if I didn't have this personal experience with pain, but I do. So I will sit with you in this room for as uncomfortable as it is, and I will walk with you out of it because I have done that myself. But for me, sensing the need and staying in the room led to me feeling queasy. The sound in the room started to go out. I started to become very lightheaded, and I knew that I was going to faint, so I had to get out of the room. And so I stepped outside of the room of this house in a village, and I went into his front yard, and I was everything but fainting, and just a pathetic mess, trying to hold myself together when I'm supposed to be there helping another guy support him. And I had to step out because the sensing of his need was so intense for me that I was taking on too much, and I was just not in a position to meet that man's need. I didn't have the stomach for it, quite frankly. And I think that if we think about the Levite and the story of the Good Samaritan, I think that maybe even if he liked this man, he'd say, oh, he's a Jew, I like Jews, I identify with Jews, and oh, wow, that looks like it's painful, and I care about that pain. I want to help this person. If that Levite, for whatever reason, didn't feel like he had the gifts or the skills, or he had a position that was calling him elsewhere, and he was committed to someone else, he can't help everybody, that would have been hard for him to walk away. That would have been hard for Philip to step outside the room to say, hey, I feel the pain, I want to help you, but I don't have what it takes to step in more than I have and kind of fix the problem and seal the wound. And I don't have the answers, right? I don't have the personal and professional skills or experience to do what I wish I could do for you. So it kills me, but I have to step away because I've done what I can here. And that's what I did. That's what I had to do. I stayed in the room as long as I could, but sadly I was not in a position to help the man in need as much as I would have liked to. I didn't have the skills, I didn't have the experience. But I'm also thankful for the third step in helping people, in meeting needs with love and compassion. The third level of responding to needs is stepping in and doing what you can to help, and that's serving the need. So you see the need, you sense the need, you stay in the room, and then you serve the need. You do what you can, right? You might not be able to do everything, but you can do something. And thankfully, there was a nurse in that room that day, and I married that nurse because she's awesome. And she was the one who was cleaning the wound. She was the nurse that was called in the beginning because they're not going to call me out to do that. That's not me. That's not my skill set. That's not what I'm about. I'm about that, but I can't do it. I wish I could. But that's Kyla's skill set. She's my hero, and she was in that room. It was pathetic. My side of it was pathetic. I was just like sitting there woozy and painful. I wasn't even doing anything. I was moral support for Kyla because she was in a country that was foreign to her with a language that she didn't necessarily feel comfortable speaking, and so she invited me along for moral support, and here I am fainting in the background, walking out of the house, and she's left in there with strangers cleaning a wound that is ridiculously troubling just to even describe. And yet she did, because that was her skill set. She stepped in. She was able to serve that man in need. So at this point, I would love to thank nurses and doctors and medical aid workers. Like, you guys are awesome. You have practical gifts to offer people in need. And I wouldn't want to know where we would be without nurses and doctors in this world. So I thank God for nurses. And I want you to know also, I served the pastor with cancer by playing with his daughter in the front yard. So that's what I could offer. I ended up spending quite a bit of time out there in the yard, and I did what I could, right? So it wasn't that I stepped away completely, but I offered what I could. And what little I had was playing with their daughter while her dad was dying in a bed in the room, which was stench-filled room. It was disgusting. And I didn't even want to imagine what she was going through. She's pretty young, and I just played with her. We had a good time. We played hide and seek, and we drew in the sand, and it was a good time. I actually kind of built up the strength. I had enough blood back in my system, back in my head, I guess, that I stood up ambitiously and walked back into the room to try to oh, Kyla, do you need more help? Do you need more assistance? And almost immediately, I got queasy again. So I came in, looked for a second, and then I had to go back out because I was already just immediately queasy again, just seeing everything. I'm like, I can't do this. I wish I could. But I did what I did. I did what I could. I offered what I had. And that's the final step in meeting needs with love and compassion. It's doing what you can and inviting God to do the rest. And do what you can and invite God to do the rest. Serve the need. You see the need, you sense the need, finally you serve the need. In the story of the Good Samaritan, there's a question that's posed to Jesus, or Jesus poses to the man at the end of the story. He says, and so, in verse 36, which of these three do you think was a neighbor to the man who fell into the hands of robbers? The man responds, the expert in the law replied, the one who had mercy on him. Now this word mercy is tender kindness, tender compassion. It's related to compassion, but it's more than compassion. Compassion is being emotionally moved by someone's experience with pain, but this final step, this serving the need, it's more than sensing the need. It's more than feeling that pain on behalf of somebody. This mercy that is referenced in verse 37 is an active compassion. It is the one who was moved to compassion and who allowed that compassion to move him to action. That's what that does. We can feel compassion and just kind of sit there. But there's another level where we can sit there, we can be led by compassion into a position of service and into action, practical service. And so our challenge today with the story of the Good Samaritan in the back of our minds is to be a neighbor of love and compassion. Some of us have windows, like the camper shell example. We have windows of escape. I challenge you to identify your windows. Places where you see needs and it's just uncomfortable, so you kind of escape almost immediately, as quickly as possible. Places where you ignore needs in other people's lives. Then I want you to identify the rooms where you know the needs are, you can feel those needs, and the challenge there is to stay in the room as long as you can. Don't stay in there beyond what is safe or healthy for you. Don't serve people to your detriment, but stay in the room as long as you can. If I fainted, they'd have another issue, right? So that's no good to anybody, so I stepped out at that point. But stay in the room as long as you can. Places where you sense needs in other people's lives. Stay in the room as long as you can. And finally, do what you can to help. You might not have everything that you would like to offer, but you do have something to offer. It might just be playing with a kid, babysitting a child in the front yard of an African village hut. Do it. If that's all you've got, give it. Serve. Offer what you have to share. We all experience pain in life. We have different degrees of pain because we have different experiences in life, and so it's not something that we should compare with one another. It's something that is relative to our personal experience, but the point is we all experience and have experienced pain in our life. And this points to the reality that we all have needs to be met. Our survival instinct is to serve ourselves first, to take care of us. But questions I'd like to ask is what would life look like if we began to serve others? What would life begin to look like if we allowed compassion to move us to action? We call this church a home because that's what we believe God is calling us to be in Norwood. Now think about a home. What happens to a home if everyone comes to be served in that home? What happens at a party if everyone comes as a guest to be served? And then I want to take that maybe disappointing, maybe we should be more active, and ask another question. What would happen to our church if people caught the vision of meeting needs with love and compassion? What would happen if the guests became hosts? What would happen if all of us who came today expecting to be served came next week expecting to serve someone else? Guys, if we ever catch this vision of meeting needs with love and compassion, this place will become a picture of heaven. This neighborhood will become a place of peace. And this building will become a launching pad where people will be sent out to meet needs of others with love and compassion, the same love and compassion that they receive when they step in this building. So we're going to close with a word of prayer. Dear God, thank you for this place. Thank you for your love and the time that you took not to look out the window and ignore our plight, our situation of brokenness, but to look in and to come in, to step in personally and powerfully. And you stayed in the room long enough to affect change, to offer a solution to our brokenness, to offer a relationship from separation from you, God. And I just ask that if we haven't experienced that connection yet, that we would step into a place of faith in Christ that would fill us with hope, fill us with love, fill us with compassion, that we can just let naturally overflow into the lives of the people around us. And in the midst of the waiting, in the midst of our needs, in the midst of the pain of life, I ask that you will meet our needs with love and compassion, that you will fill us so that we can be poured out, and so that we can meet the needs of others around us with that same love and compassion that we receive from you. And by your grace and in your power, may we learn how to be neighbors of love and compassion in Norwood. In Jesus' name, amen. Thank you for listening to Norwood Wesleyan Church online. If you ever find yourself in Edmonton, Alberta, I hope you can stop by for a worship service on Sunday morning at 11 a.m. And when you do, be sure to stay after for our family meal. This is Pastor Phillip Telfer, hoping you can join us again as we continue reaching for God together.